Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Happy, Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2. So, really, the main appeal about this show that is currently, right now, the second is recording, conveniently on Netflix, even though it's a sci fi thing, it's conveniently on Netflix. I'm like, yeah, like, it's good that this is still on Netflix so I can conveniently watch it whenever I want. But when I immediately go through this show, I always think that this has some kind of Deadpool kind of feel, and it has this very dark and gritty comedy with it. It also has some kind of like Sin City kind of flavor to it, where we of course have Nick Sachs, who is to have this like heart trouble or heart problem, and he might have numerous heart attacks within the show, very much like Hartigan from Sin City. And of course, he used to have that deep, gritty voice, just like Bruce Willis was in that film. But yeah, like, I have a lot of fun with the goofy concept that this this show is to go on to being. And so, what is this show actually about? So, one thing that I want to mention, that this show is actually based off of a comic book. So there is an actual thing out there where this thing is actually based off of. So really just kind of interesting to kind of realize that, with it being a very dark, a very dark comic book, or a very dark story, I should say. So Nick Sachs, of course, is to be this hero cop that eventually was drummed off the force, let's just say, in a very old-fashioned, stereotypical way of saying. And so Nick Sachs is to go on to be this hitman for hire, or this private eye, or is to just be a guy who's just kind of counting down the days until he's possibly going to die soon. And that's why he's just kind of pushing himself to get to that point, possibly. Sad to say, but it's true. So, we have this character who is to imagine blowing his head off and having the big, massive spray of blood just flying everywhere, hitting people, and he's dabbing and dancing around. That's to be kind of the opening scene of this very darkened episode, where immediately right out of the gate they like show you how dark this show is going to be. So it's not a show for everybody, but it's a very adult-eshed like show. Uh, but yeah, so we end up finding out that Nick Sachs is to get mixed in with the wrong guys that he is killing. And the guys that he is to be killing is to be giving him this password that we don't really know if he was actually given a password or nothing at all. But it just seems that everybody is up in arms to want to wipe out Sachs, because he may know this password. It's either Mr. Blue and all of his people are coming after Nick, or it could be also Fresh Ken, who is also on the other side of things, wanting to prevent Mr. Blue from getting this password within these two episodes. So we have Nick Sachs, who is to also find out somewhere in this episode that his ex-lover Amanda is to have some daughter. Excuse me. And so Amanda is going on with her daughter to some Wishy concert that is to be put together by some guy named Sunny Shine. And so Wishies are kind of to be like the Teletubbies of this world, and like you can't help but see like the vast similarities of them. And so we have Haley that is trying to get away from this concert to then desperately want to see the stage better, be able to talk to the host of this, to eventually find herself in the grasp of a horrific looking Santa's coat that is to collect her and shove her in some box for her to go on and hope that Happy, her imaginary horse of a friend, is going to go on and find Nick Sax and help her be found, Haley. So, with that said, I think that's all that I want to say in a very cryptic like sense, because I'll go on in spoiler sense and hopefully break this down more. It seems that we end up finding out much more and more with Nick Sax. We end up finding out why exactly Nick Sax's relationship with Amanda didn't work. We'll kind of put the pieces together of everything else, where it seems that Nick Sax eventually is going to already know certain people's names, and because they have certain reputations in this town. So, with that said, there's a lot to cover in spoilers, so hopefully I can go out of my way to remember it all and memorize it all and so on and so forth. So let's go out of our way to say that it's about that customary time, yet again, to go into this thing called that double 5 time territory, because it's about that time, yet again, to go into spoilers about this one. Before we go, what would be my vote about these 2 episodes? Well, the main reason why I'm going back into this show is because I had a lot of fun with it. It's a dark and disturbing show, I get that, but also I have fun watching this show. I think it's funny. I think, yeah, there is some kind of content coming out of here. And plus, also, we're still coming off of Christmas, so if there's ever a time to really pop this show out, it's possibly now. And because really, just the second season has nothing to do with Christmas, but this show does. So, I want to kind of get this kind of out of the way to kind of cover this, so it's like a Christmas thing that I just so happen to be doing after Christmas. It wasn't really much of a plan. It was just blah, might as well just put this out because it's basically New Year's almost. So, very delayed, but otherwise, hey, I'm gonna go and watch this show. Hopefully, people like it, enjoy it, and want to know more about it. So, without a doubt, it's about that time to go into that double 5 and just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this episode. So, the opening of this episode is to, of course, have us open with Nick Sax in a bar, spitting out blood into a urinal. And so, because that's that's the darkest, showcasing right away how dark this show gets. So Nick Sax is all of a sudden look at the mirror like, "Hey, beautiful," as he is to imagine guns going into his face to blow his brains out, and all of a sudden he's dancing with this cut off head that has all this blood all swailing around, and women are dancing in front of him. There's a party to be had, and so we of course have Nick just going on and pushing his head against this mirror and going on to this bar to go and talk to this bartender called Terrence. So Terrence is to go on and mention if Nick Sax was to go and destroy any number of his porcelain, and Nick Sax is like, well, you just have to figure out from what end. Oh my god. So Nick is going on and taking this alcohol and gargling it, which is to kind of have any of the guys that were drinking at this bar now leaving. And so Terrence is like, "Hey, you're gonna make me lose business." And Nick Sax is like, "Well, hey, I'm actually keeping you in the black." So all of a sudden, Nick is to go on and see this motorcycle messenger that is to be a Vesper courier. And so Nick Sax, of course, is to get his working orders. going after a guy or two cousins that are, of course, to be Scaramucci's, both Pal and I think Florian. Florian, but it's basically the Scalamucci brothers. And so we have Nick who gets his marching orders, and so how exactly he is going to go on and perform this trick is to, of course, uh, have him go and meet this one prostitute and have her schedule some get together with her and him and have these Scaramucci's think that this guy is to be caught with his pants down. Because let's get into it. So, the Scaramucci's are to meet with a guy named Disco Mike. I don't know why he's called Disco Mike, but he's called Disco Mike regardless. So, we have pal Scalamucci who is going on and talking to Mikey, and mentioning that since his father was to finally kick it, that he was probably to leave him a good sum of inheritance, and Mike is just like if anything, his dad, I guess, had given him more than just some kind of inheritance. He basically just gave him a password to go on and try to get to it. But Mike was also to be very disturbed by the way of which that he was to last see his father, and so on and so forth. So, but we end up having Pal who's going and talking to Mikey about how good he's having it and how he's going to parties and he's meeting women and so on and so forth, yada yada yada. So, but we go on and we have Pal who's telling Mikey that they're going to do a job to take out Nick Sachs. So Nick Sachs is to find this working woman who is working on a man's junk, which we end up finding out that it was a real shrimp of a wang. And so we go on and have Nick, who is watching on as this prawn man and this working girl are getting a BJ out of this. And so Nick all of a sudden is to see this prawn man who has this hammer that's about to smack this woman, as this woman is wanting him to hurry it up because she has another appointment. So we have Nick Sachs come in, and this prawn man ends up going swinging this hammer, and it hits the side of this door where Nick Sachs is at. So Nick Sachs goes on and shoots the prawn man, and is to tell this girl, it's like, well, hey, I just saved your life, because if I would have came any later, you would have had a hammer in your head. And so we have this working girl who all of a sudden is looking at Nick Sachs and remembering her, or remembering him helping her out at one point, realizing that she should go on and change her ways. And Nick Sachs is looking at her and he's like, well, it didn't really feel like it stuck. But hey, if anything, to show appreciation, you can go on and do a little something for me. So we have the Scalamucci's and Mikey going off to supposedly figure that they can go and catch this guy with his pants down. So they come in to this room to start gun blazing Nick Sachs, and supposedly we are to immediately think that Nick Sachs is dead here, but I guess instead we are to actually just see a body that looks similar to Nick Sachs, because Nick Sachs is coming from behind them, telling them that it seemed that somebody had put a hit out on them, and the only way that Nick could figure out of how to get them is by putting a hit on Nick Sachs, which is him, so he can take them out. So he comes from behind and starts shooting them down, and all of a sudden, Mikey is to be here, and he decides to go and shoot Nick Sachs. And so at first, we think that Nick Sachs is really shot here, but we really just find out that he has a bulletproof vest. And so we end up having it to where Nick Sachs is going and shooting Mikey, and Mikey, of course, is to fall out this window and fall to the ground, where Nick Sachs is to go and check on him to see if he's still alive. So all of a sudden, Mikey is talking about like some weird thing, talking about his mother and all of this stuff, and Nick wants nothing to do with it. He's like, "Hey, I'm not your mom." Like, but so Mikey goes and is to tell Nick Sachs this password, and like Nick wants nothing to do with that. He's already getting paid because reasonably, like the way of which that he's killing these guys are to be a better payday than eventually what's this guy going to tell him here. So all of a sudden we have Nick Sachs, who is to try to get up and try to swig a thing up from his flask, and he all of a sudden is having a massive heart attack. And because at first he thinks that he can shake it off, but then all of a sudden he realizes that he's really having a heart attack here, and so he falls over. We have, of course, Detective Meredith going on and having Nick Sachs being hauled away into this ambulance and telling the ambulance drivers, like, hey, like, you better keep this guy alive, kind of thing. Paraphrasing here, of course. So we go on here and we have Meredith going and talking to the prostitute and wanting to get her story about how this all had went down. And this working girl is saying, like, well, hey, like, can I go and like clean myself off? Like, I have all kinds of stuff coming from a guy or a number of guys that are all over me. And Meredith is like, go ahead and go and clean yourself off. So Nick, of course, is going through this ambulance, and so we all of a sudden have Happy finding him in this ambulance. And so Happy is all of a sudden greeting Nick, who is to, of course, be brought back to life, with him getting asking for a number of different kinds of drugs after they kind of pull away his bulletproof vest. And he's going and asking for adrenaline, and he's asking for it sounded like an explosive that he asked for, like nitroglycerin, which I think is an explosive. What the is nitroglycerin? Like, that sounds like a bomb to me. But we have Nick going on and asking for all these drugs, all these pills, and all this stuff. And so all of a sudden, Happy is to arrive and start singing this happy horse, of course. Lots of fun, this and that. And so Nick is just kind of like dancing along with it. But he's like, but I'm going to go and try to get some drugs to make you just go away. And Happy's like, well, I'm not going to go away. And Nick is just like, well, hey, like, you pink elephant, I just want you to go away. And Happy's like, I'm not an elephant. Like, that would mean that I would have a trunk, and like, look at my butt. Like, I don't have a trunk. So, and plus also he asks him if he's colorblind. So it's like, hey, I'm not pink. Like, do I look pink to you? So now let's go on and let's stop that there and transition to Amanda and Haley, to where we can get to this point. So Amanda and Haley are going off to this Wishy concert, and so we have, of course, both Amanda and Haley going into this cab ride, where we have Amanda asking Haley like what's her favorite Wishy, and of course what's Happy's favorite Wishy. And Amanda is to mention what her favorite one is, but it seems that Happy doesn't like any of them because they're too weird. So we go on, we have them going to this concert, and so we all of a sudden have this Sunny Shine character coming out, uh, eventually having us waiting for the wishies. And so Sunny Shine is mentioning to everybody, it's like, well, hey, you're not gonna get one wish, you're not gonna get two wish, you're gonna get three wishes, and everybody's like, yeah, whoa, yeah, this is crazy. So we have Haley desperately who can't see anything, and so she's wanting to go on to change the direction of where she is so she can maybe possibly have Sunnyshine see her, but that all of a sudden has her to be having Happy tell her, it's like, well, hey, like, you should be running, or you should run. And Haley's like, run from what? For this Santa Claus to go and take her, grab her, and then shove her in a box and drill holes through it while she's inside of it, for her to now be waiting for Happy to go on and desperately trying to rescue uh, Haley with Nick Sachs. So Haley at some point is going on and talking to who she believes is some other girl. And so Haley at one point had gone through Amanda's Facebook or some kind of social media that had a bunch of pictures, and she ended up finding a picture of Nick Sachs somewhere in there where where Haley just naturally assumes that this is her dad, some cop hero. And so when Nick Sachs is going to meet up with Haley, she's probably going to get a very big dose of disappointment, because when Happy is to meet up with Nick Sachs, he is to kind of feel the same thing. So we have we have Haley going on and telling this supposed other girl that's in this box that her father is a big cop hero and that she'll be rescued by him. It's only a matter of time. Dot 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 dot. And so, what we are to think is some other girl from another box is to actually just be this Santa who is to have this good mimicking skill of sounding like a little girl. And so really we have it where the Santa is saying, it's like, well, uh maybe this cop will be found by uh Santa before this cop is to be found by him. And so really that's to be kind of the exchange going on between those characters in this first episode, or possibly through most of these episodes. But so at least I covered most of that. So now we go on and we have Nick Sachs that is awakening in this hospital. And so he is to, of course, meet up with his old partner called Detective Meredith McCarthy. And so Meredith is, of course, opening this one window that Happy is to come out of. And so we have Nick Sachs is like, no, don't open that window. And it's like, oh, like, you let him in. So Nick is continuing to talk to Happy while also talking to Meredith. And so Meredith is to mention to Nick Sachs that she was to see Nick as her hero, but Nick doesn't know like what he's got himself in. And for Meredith, what she really wants here is for Nick to tell her the password, so that way all of this can be resolved, so he's not going to be tortured and murdered and killed, because he had found himself in this civil war between families. Because Mr. Blue, who is a Scaramucci himself, had gone on to kill his own nephews. And so when Mikey was to supposedly have that password, he didn't think, Mr. Blue was not to think that the password would fall into the hands of Nick Sachs, but now it has. So, but we end up having Nick Sachs and kind of Meredith really just have this past of sorts where we end up finding out that both Nick Sachs and Meredith did have an affair, which Amanda is to find out about, and that ended up ruining their both Nick Sachs and Amanda's marriage. And so, hence why we end up finding out within the end of this episode, this first episode, that Haley is actually Nick Sachs' daughter. And so he'll have to go on and do the right thing and try to find his daughter to rescue her from this would-be murderer or torturer, whoever he actually is. So, but we have this kind of this anyways, so we end up also having Mr. Blue, who is to be told by one of his people what is going on with the whole incident between Nick Sachs and the Scaramuccis and Mikey, and he ends up finding that out via Meredith, because Meredith is technically working for Mr. Blue. And so Mr. Blue goes on and calls a guy named Smoothie, who is to, of course, be this guy that once we see him is to be covered in blood, and is to be very much like a Dexter kind of guy, where he has this kind of slaughterhouse butcher-like look to him consistently. And he tortures and murders people with this smile. So we go on and we have Meredith after, of course, Nick is kind of done talking to her, and then she leaves. We, of course, have Happy, now considering Sachs is much more coherent here. Happy is telling him, like, what they need to do. They need to go find Haley. And so Nick, of course, wants nothing to do with this imaginary friend, and he wants him to just kind of go away. But every time he looks into the face of this imaginary friend, like there's something about his eyes, or there's something about his nose, or there's something about his teeth, or some kind of something that's that eventually is to just make Sachs kind of like weak in the knees to want to go and help this imaginary friend. But he doesn't want to do it right away. So Sachs, of course, is to realize that he needs to get the heck out of this hospital, because he's kind of a sitting duck here. So Nick Sachs goes on and like tries to make his way out of here, and is to all of a sudden have Happy going and telling Nick Sachs that there are 5 guys coming that are to come after him. And if I were, of course, Nick Sachs, I'd be like, well, one, how is it that you knew there were 5 guys? But then also, how did you know that they were all coming for me? So we find that Smoothie with these 4 other guys are making their way to Nick Sachs. And so Nick here is to just have this fire extinguisher, and he's kind of getting ready for these guys to come. And he's like, yeah, like I'm gonna tear a hole through all these guys. Yeah. So, but then all of a sudden, as Nick is kind of getting ready and getting set to just go after these guys, he all of a sudden passes out and falls over, to be woken up, tied to this hospital bed, or just really just strapped to it. And Smoothie is to appear here and be talking to Nick, where Nick Sachs is to know that this is Smoothie, but the only thing that Nick knows about Smoothie is he liked to get peed on. And so Smoothie is just seeing all the other guys kind of laugh at that. And so Smoothie is like, well, hey, like I'm gonna go and I'm gonna chop up your Johnson in tiny bits and pieces. And Nick is just like, well, like that's gonna take a while, because you know what I mean, right, guy? He knows. So we start, of course, to have Smoothie, who is kind of having these exchanges with Nick, which has Nick go on and tell like Smoothie, okay, like I'll tell you the password. And so Smoothie is just like, okay, what is it? And he's like, hey, get really close. And so Nick ends up saying tinkle tinkle. And so Smoothie is just like, yeah, like you won't let that go. So Smoothie, of course, is to get this saw out, and slowly but surely we of course have Happy that is trying to motivate Nick to get out of this. He's like drill instructoring him. He's kind of doing all this like these performances and whatever to try to get Nick much more wanting to just get out of this situation and not just bleed to death or get killed here. And so finally we almost have Smoothie starting to cut here, and all of a sudden Nick is to figure out a way to get this of course cutting tool away from him to eventually have some blood being sprayed here. But eventually Nick is to get out of his ties and go off and kind of use his binding like things to go and knock some guys out here. And then we end up going and having Nick finding this fire extinguisher. And so he's bashing this guy's head with a fire extinguisher, and he's looking at Smoothie while he's doing it. And then he goes on to take the spraying part of the fire extinguisher and spraying it all into this guy's face, as Smoothie's just watching on, and he's like, ah. So we end up, of course, having Nick run the heck out of here. While, of course, he's doing it, he's finding some doctor's coat, so that way you don't actually show his backside in the show here. So that way, technically, most of his skin is technically covered here. But eventually, we do like see this guy like basically with nothing on, because at one point he's to go and get some clothing exchanges, and these guys are basically commenting on how uh, Sax's sack is just like kind of uh, clocking back and forth. So weirdly. So we we go on here and we have Nick who is to try to make it through this hospital, but it seems that there's also to be these police officers that are after Nick Sachs too. So everybody is to be kind of on Mr. Blue's take. So eventually Nick is to beat down both these police officers, take their guns, of course, and so Nick is to go on and eventually find that there is a difficulty for him to make it down any kind of hallway or get down any flight of stairs without being seen by somebody. So he is to be dinging this elevator. And so, like, both of these guys are thinking that there's kind of no way out here. And so we end up going on and just having Nick who opens his elevator shaft and he realizes that he can probably fall 3 floors and possibly be fine here. And so we have Nick who grabs this imaginary horse and is to just jump into this elevator shaft, falling 3 floors. And so Nick, of course, is making it out of this hospital to find Detective Meredith's car, and he's like, "Well, hey, can I borrow your car from you?" So we have Nick Sachs who goes on to, and I'm kind of wondering when does this first episode stuff go into the second episode of things, because I'm just gonna keep on going and tie everything together. So at some point, if there's something that I possibly forget, or if there's some kind of transition that I don't get to, or whatever and what have you, there's a lot of stuff to unpack through these 2 episodes because there's just a lot of things, especially in just one episode right out of the gate. There's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of stuff going on. We had Amanda that was to go on and make it to the police precinct and mentioning that her daughter is missing. So they're going on and filing a report, and Amanda is going on and asking for the captain of this police precinct, or she's going on and asking for certain detectives that will actually probably help her here because she knows what she's talking about. And so later on, we have Amanda coming back to this police precinct after putting up numerous papers out of her lost girl, trying to find the right picture to put on this poster or on this piece of paper, and eventually finding there seems to be more than one kid missing. And we end up finding this other kid who's in one of these boxes who has probably been missing longer. Then, of course, this uh, this girl. So, but here's one thing that I did forget about. We had Happy that is going and journeying off to find Nick Sachs, and when he goes on to find Nick Sachs, there was a number of events that happen through the way of which that he goes and finds him. He finds that one guy is to be beaten up and to have a bottle be broken over him, and a couple is going at it in some parking lot. And so Abby's like, well, I guess they're having fun. And so, like, Happy just continues to see all of these, like, very dark things that he's kind of, like, in his own way trying to say is, like, some kind of, much more, like, kid-friendly thing than what's really going on here. So, but I just want to quick cover that so that can be covered. we really have like certain bizarre censorship that also goes onto this first pilot episode, which I'm like, okay, so wait a minute. Like we have like Nick Sachs shown a specific way, but why is it that another person like isn't quite shown in a certain kind of light of things? What's up with that, so to speak? Um, I guess it's just like, well, uh, male and female kind of things. Like maybe there wasn't a whole acceptance of showing a part of something, so they just kind of had to deal with that. So, really, between Nick and Happy's exchanges, when Happy is to go with Nick in this car, we, of course, have Happy that's telling Nick that Haley is her daughter, hence why I guess this imaginary friend can have or can be seen by Nick and Haley because they're family biologically. So now Nick in the next episode is to go on and be on Jerry Springer, where all of a sudden this couple is already arguing about like, hey, this is the baby's daddy. I know it's the baby's daddy, and so we have this couple here who is kind of hassling over this, and so Jerry is going on and like trying to restore order here because we have one guy in the audience who's like, I want me some of that. Like, I'll take some of that right here. If this guy doesn't want it, and so all of a sudden, like both this girl from the stage is all of a sudden going and like dancing on with this guy that was in the crowd, and so everybody's like, ooh, yeah. And so we don't get to a DNA test or anything like that. We just kind of transition to Jerry to then go on and transition to Nick Sachs. And like I thought that this was kind of funny here because like I was like Nick kind of makes a joke of like not really realizing that Jerry Springer was a show that was still on the air. And I honestly didn't realize that either, but I ended up finding out after this, of course, show was to come on. It seems that Jerry was to start to have a resurgence, Jerry Springer show. So I was kind of like, okay, that's interesting. Like, no offense to Jerry Springer, like I thought, like that thing had kind of run its course, especially when you had like a whole movie kind of done about it. And you kind of figure out kind of the magic behind the show, so to speak, and how they technically run that kind of thing with that whole movie that was in place. So how those people like they aren't actually real, or eventually they're like going on the show and having this story, but eventually they really escalate it to absurd levels or whatever. But no offense to that show, like hey, they're brilliant people that are to come up with these things. And like it eventually like you kind of look at that and you start to see other kind of shows that kind of follow that technique or pattern or whatever, and so on and so forth. So Jerry Springer is going on and talking to Nick Sachs, and of course, he is still in his hospital gown and, of course, doctored uh, coat here, and his hair is all kind of messed up and disheveled. And so, of course, Jerry Springer is going on and trying to like therapize Nick here and convincing him that he does have a child. And Nick Sachs is like, I'm sorry, like I'm not the dad. Like if anything, like I'm not a good enough guy to be a kid to this dad, and so on and so forth. And so it just kind of gets to the point where all of a sudden there's this like free for all going. People are beating up everybody, and Nick Sachs just decides to just walk off here, and he ends up walking off out of this diner to then go into his car because Nick is going on and talking to Happy, and so Nick Sachs is to mention that the only thing that he's really ashamed of is possibly the breakfast that he's eating for this day. But hey, it's like you got to take one for the team kind of thing, and so on and so forth. So, but yeah, so Happy is continuously going on and convincing Nick Sachs that he still needs to go and find Haley. And that Happy is also just disappointed in Nick Sachs because the way that Haley kind of built him up to be this hero cop, and how we turn around and have this guy be who he is just so. Nick Sachs is to go on and get into his car because he's like, hey, like, I'm gonna go and try to get 20 grand and a boatload of guns and get out of town. Because we end up having it to where, of course, Nick was to make his way back to his apartment, and he goes on and is to thumb through his boxes of clothes, and there, of course, are to be a number of Fresh Ken's guys there, all wanting to kill, of course, Nick Sachs. But before they get started with all this, we have Nick Sachs go on and start thumbing through his clothes, and he's like, oh, like, so you guys didn't go through and like start rummaging through my place, or did you? So we have, of course, Nick Sachs completely taking off his clothes to put on new ones. And so the guys are going on and looking at this guy. He's like, man, like, those balls are just kind of swinging like a clock. And they're like, yeah. So Nick goes on and gets a new, fresh thing of clothes. It's kind of weird that I guess he has another coat lined up like he had before. So it seems like he just has the same clothes, just numerous amounts of clothes, realizing that eventually he's going to get stripped naked possibly at one point. And plus also he has a number of scars. So Nick is going through the house and telling the guys, well, like, hey, like, because he's kind of getting this bag of a bunch of, like, certain spank tapes or bottles and whatever. And the one thing he's to really grab out of it is his wedding ring to put on. And so he goes through and tells these guys, it's like, well, hey, like, I know that you guys are working for Mr. Blue, and here's a middle finger to him. And, like, I do have some Chinese in here. It's 10 days old, but, like, hey, maybe the SMG and whatever, you guys can have whatever you want. So the guys are, of course, to tell, of course, Nick that they're not working for Mr. Blue here. They're actually working for Fresh Ken, who, of course, wants Nick dead. And because they feel, or Fresh Ken feels, that if Mr. Blue is to get this password, that he'll be this, this, like, unstoppable force, and he'll be, like, invincible. So they're going to go on and try to prevent Mr. Blue from getting this password, which really just means that they're going to try and kill Happy to, of course, get this to not come out, this password. So, excuse me. So we go on and we have Happy going through and taking down these guys, And he ends up, of course, breaking another guy out this window. He ends going and falling. And so Nick eventually goes through this fire escape, trying to escape from these guys. And so later on, Detective Meredith is to go on and find her police car. Now, basically, like broken, of course. And so Meredith is kind of regretting loaning this car to her old partner. And so Meredith goes on and is to talk to Mr. Blue. And so we end up getting some backstory for Meredith, mentioning that her father had been killed in the line of duty, and that her mother was a very talented woman that eventually had lost her mind. And so we have Mr. Blue here, who is to go on and make this kind of analogy that he is to have grapes with him here. And so he's to pull off this grape and he's to mention it. It's like, well, like, you see this grape here and how that right now it's just this ball and it's this sweet thing. And eventually, at some point, this grape is going to get squished until there's just the mere essence of it left. And eventually grapes normally are to be turned into wine, and no longer be what they were before. And so Meredith is like, well, I get it, I'm the grape. And so Mr. Blue is like, no, I'm the grape. Like, you're basically turning me into the grape the longer and longer that we're basically waiting for you to get this information from your former partner. We really think, like, Mr. Blue really thinks that this should be the easiest thing in the world to kind of do, and Meredith is just taking her sweet time. So now Mr. Blue is going and stepping things up because Meredith is to go home to all of a sudden see her mother, who is all of a sudden talking to Smoothie, and both of them are putting on these face masks, and Smoothie is going on and cooking Meredith's mother some food here, and Meredith goes on and is to go into the room with Smoothie and push him up against this refrigerator. And so Smoothie is to, of course, be very seductive about how he's talking to Meredith, talking about her nethers, and how they smell, or that this girl is flat chested, which really she's not. And like, I don't really get that comment whatsoever. But we're just having really, like, Smoothie here, just kind of really figuring out a way to just be kind of nasty to this girl, to the point where Smoothie even tries to kiss her at some point. And so we, of course, have Smoothie, who's kind of offended about how Meredith hasn't really gone on and, like, combed her mother's hair, and he had to spend hours trying to get all the problems out of this girl's hair. And how Smoothie is just like, well, hey, like, hurry this up, because I don't want to no longer be in this geriatric thing where I'm looking over your mother anymore, so hurry this up. And Meredith is going on saying, it's like, well, hey, I've cleaned up my fair share of mother's own my mother's own crap, so, like, hey, like, uh I'll get this done, like, I'll go and do whatever you guys need me to do, and so on and so forth. So we push on here and are to have Sax go and eat breakfast. And so we go on and we have Nick having this plan of how, of course, he can go on and be able to have enough money and have enough guns and stuff to safely get out of Dodge, out of town. So I want to also see here if there's anything left that I had forgotten about. because I feel like that's probably a thing that I probably numerously forgot about a number of things. Uh, I think we're in the good graces right now. I think we're in the green for the most point. So we have, of course, Nick, who is to go on to this one poker table of a guy who he owes money to. Excuse me. And so Nick Sachs is going to this laundromat, and so Nick and Happy are going to this laundromat, and so Nick is shoving Happy into this one dryer and turning the machine on because Nick is lying to Happy that Haley is possibly in this machine. And Happy's like, "What?" And so he goes into the machine for Nick to just slam this door on him and to hit the button for this guy to just, of course, be like put through the ringer. So Nick goes on and is to go to Ledick, but this guy ends up mentioning that it's pronounced differently. It's Ledick or some kind of goofy thing like that. So Happy, of course, is to eventually uh, meet up with Nick a little bit later in this poker game here. But the first thing that Nick is to go on and do once he gets his first set of cards is he ends up, of course, giving up his wedding ring to get some money out of this. So we go on and have, of course, Nick with a pair of kings. And so he's thinking, like, oh, I'm going to get a big payout out of here. And so we end up finding out that it really isn't all that so. And so it seems that Nick is just starting to lose like everything he is to possibly have, his chips and everything. And so all of a sudden, Happy is to finally make his way to this table, and he's kind of this little like dust ball of a character now. And so all of a sudden, we have Happy, who is to start looking at these other characters' cards and mentioning that they have a heart, or they have a queen of hearts, or something like that, or just a queen. And so Nick is like, "Oh my god, like that is to be amazing." So Nick ends up going off with Happy, and there was this one time where both Nick and Happy were running off somewhere, and Nick, of course, was cussing, and Happy was like, "Hey, like, swear jar, things come out." Or things slip out and go too far. And so Nick goes and takes his swear jar and crushes it. And so Happy's to realize that he has no money now. I thought that that was hilarious, but they go on and go back to the whole swear jar thing in this scene here, as well as Happy continuing to kind of mimic Nick here. And when they make it into the laundromat, Happy is going on and like playing out the exchange between this Santa and between Nick, and like he's going on and saying like, "Oh, who, me? Yeah, me." like, like I'm after my daughter. Yeah. Like Happy's just kind of weirdly playing this whole scene all out, where he's like, "Yeah," because we have just Happy just like mimicking Mick a lot, or a Nick here. So we have Nick Sachs going and talking to Happy and mentioning to him that I think they need to finally become partners here, that they need to work together, like PB and J. And so Nick is mentioning that if Happy is to help Nick here, that they're going to go on and save Haley. And then Happy is just like I don't know, like I think that you're I think that you're lying to me again. I don't know if I can trust you kind of thing. And so Nick is going on and just like laying it on thick to really just have Happy believe Nick is telling the truth here. And so even to the point of Nick imaginarily tossing a coin into the swear jar. And so Happy is just like, okay, I'll help you. So Happy goes and tells all of the cards of all the people. And so Nick goes on and is starting to have a winning streak. While he was away, we had Ledick and all these guys at this poker table are saying that they need to wait Nick out here because they're waiting on Mr. Blue to arrive because they're going to hand this guy over to him. And so they're kind of waiting things out. So Nick is to start winning and winning and winning. And so Ledick's asking, uh, like, Nick how he's going on and figuring this all out. And so Nick is just to actually just tell him the truth that there's to be some blue unicorn that's on top of this guy's head telling him what his cards are. So we all of a sudden have Ledick lose another hand, and all of a sudden he ends up going and smacking this cocaine that is to kind of spray some mist of cocaine. And all of a sudden we have Happy that's just freaking out and he's bouncing all over the walls. It's kind of like Roger Rabbit when Roger Rabbit is to go and drink alcohol. He starts like flying all over the place. So, from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, of course. So, we, of course, have Nick now wanting to just kind of like finish up and go on and just say like, okay guys, I'm done. Like if anything, I can buy back my wedding ring and like still have money left over and get all those guns because Nick is to go in there and start asking for all these guns like Desert Eagle and anything that's going to leave a big hole into somebody. And so we go on here and finally mention to Nick why these guys are kind of holding him off. And so eventually Nick is to kind of tip over this table and slide down all these guns and all these things to go after all these guys and to take them all out and start to murder and kill a lot of them. And so we go on here and have Nick get all the stuff that he, of course, is to need to go on to his mission. And so immediately both Nick and Happy are going into another car, and Happy is dealing with the after effects of him being just high off of cocaine. And so Happy, of course, is asking Nick, like, hey, are you, or Nick is asking Happy, hey, are you all right from that whole drug and the drug cocaine thing? And Happy's like, yeah, I'm fine. But he's kind of like in this kind of like hoodie and he's wearing these like sunglasses and whatever. We have Nick consistently having a Happy wear these sunglasses when he's talking to him because there's just something about his eyes, his innocent puppy dog looking eyes, when Nick is to really talk to him here. So, making Nick weak in the knees. So, Nick is really just driving off here, just wanting to get the heck out of town. And Happy is trying to convince Nick again to go after Haley. And so Nick is only thinking about saving his own skin. But then the more and more that Nick is talking to Happy here, we finally just have Nick, who just kind of breaks down, decides like, okay, like we'll go and we'll find this Haley girl and we'll go and we'll rescue her. And Happy's like, yeah. So we have Nick turn around because he's going the opposite direction of where he should be going, because Happy is to at least know the direction of where they should be going to get to Haley. So, but we'll find out eventually that Happy doesn't actually know the store of which that he came out of where, of course, this girl is to be in. But he'll remember the music, sort of, or he'll eventually know like the layout of it, or like there'll be some familiar things to it that will help them eventually kind of find the area of where they're going, and eventually they'll go to some bar that's filled with Santas. And so we'll have Nick, who goes on, is starting to ask the people there, like, well, hey, have you seen this one kind of Santa? And they're like, oh yeah, we've seen that guy. But Happy is just a very like awful like describer of who this guy is. And so I think at one point Nick is to go on and have Happy describe this guy to some drawer, that I guess was to be this kind of police officer who was to draw sketches of people. But now he's kind of like off on his own, just kind of drawing these pictures. So I believe from what I remember from this show. But anyways, yeah. So we'll go on to that. We'll go into more episodes. If it seems that people are interested in this show, I will be happy to continue this. But hopefully, I covered everything. There's a lot to unpack in this thing. Uh, Really, like, I'm not quite sure exactly of how like I'm going to break down these episodes, whether I should just go and do just one episode per or two, just because there's a lot in like one episode, even though it's like 40 some odd minutes. Like, I just want to make sure that I'm not hugely forgetting a lot of things or leaving things out. Um, but yeah, so with that said, I think I've covered most of this, but there's probably something that I probably did forget. But I think I am quasi okay about all the things that I've covered. I've kind of like half covered certain dialogues, maybe the most important parts of certain dialogues, and so on and so forth. Uh, there was the one bit of dialogue where Mr. Blue was going on and talking to his family while he was on the phone, and he was telling them about the one dog that was consistently scratching himself while Mr. Blue was trying to put this star on this Christmas tree, and telling the kid, it's like, well, hey, like, stop that dog from scratching or we're going to lose another dog. Like, we've lost 4 dogs already, and I don't want to lose this other dog. So stop this dog from scratching. And so the mother is mentioning the reason why this dog is scratching is because of this, like, weird, goofy, like, Christmas headgear thing that he's wearing, and he, of course, just doesn't want to wear it. So we go on here, and, like, so. Eventually that all gets resolved without any kind of harm due to a dog. But yeah, anything else? There's probably a million things that I forgot about, but without a doubt, I think that's the best that I could probably do covering these episodes. But this show is a lot of fun. And we're just kind of starting off here. And so, yeah. Um, with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here because I think it's good enough. If there's anything that I probably forgot or will forget or whatever about this thing, then I can possibly rebuttal and cover it into the next review. If it seems like this thing is to be interesting enough to people, I will go on and continue to go out of my way to review this thing. But with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.